Over time, one question seems to return again and again, more than almost any other. It is not simply about why emotionally distant people pull away, what their silence means, or how someone should recover after being left behind. Those questions matter, and there is plenty to understand about them. But there is another question that people often carry quietly, and it usually feels much more urgent. Did this person actually develop a genuine emotional bond with me? Was the connection between us real? Or was it something much more temporary and easy for them to abandon than my own feelings made it seem? For many people leaving these kinds of relationships, the hardest part is not only losing someone, it is questioning whether the relationship ever meant what they believed it meant. They remember moments that once felt incredibly deep, moments when the connection seemed unlike anything they had experienced before. Then the distance appeared. Conversations became less frequent. Silence took over. Their behavior suddenly seemed to tell an entirely different story, one suggesting that none of those moments mattered very much. And now you are left standing between two realities that seem impossible to reconcile. One is what you experienced emotionally, and the other is what their actions appeared to say. You cannot completely trust either one. That unresolved conflict can hurt even more than the ending itself. So let's actually examine it instead of offering empty reassurance, because comfort without understanding rarely survives when doubt returns. There are specific behaviors that can reveal when an emotionally distant person has formed a meaningful attachment, but those behaviors often look completely different from the signs you might expect from someone who is comfortable with intimacy. If you judge everything through the behavior of a secure and openly affectionate person, you may completely overlook the evidence that is sitting right in front of you. And before we examine those signs, there is something important to understand about what genuine attachment can cost someone who has spent years protecting themselves from closeness. For someone who has built their emotional life around independence and self-protection, forming a genuine bond does not always feel like a smooth or peaceful process. There may be no comfortable, gradual movement toward closeness that feels natural while it is happening. Instead, the deeper the connection becomes, the more their internal defenses may become activated. This does not necessarily mean you did something wrong. It can happen because their emotional system was designed to prevent exactly this level of attachment. Those protective walls did not appear randomly. They may have developed over years, reinforced through repeated experiences, and maintained by a deep internal expectation that allowing someone to matter creates the possibility of losing control, being disappointed, or eventually being hurt. So when another person actually gets through those defenses and becomes emotionally significant, something unusual happens. The connection can feel difficult to control. It may feel less like a deliberate decision and more like discovering that someone has quietly become part of their internal world. That can be frightening, precisely because it was never consciously planned. Imagine realizing that another person has become emotionally important to you before you ever decided that you wanted them to have that place. You cannot simply switch the feeling off because it has become inconvenient. This is where some of the confusing behaviors begin to make more sense. Instead of direct declarations, you may see subtle statements, unexpected memories, unusual acts of consideration, or small moments of vulnerability that would seem insignificant if you did not understand the context behind them. Stay with me, because these details can reveal far more than dramatic words ever could. One of the first signs can appear in a form that looks almost like self-criticism. It often slips into an ordinary conversation without any announcement that something important has just been revealed. They might say, "I'm just not very good at this," or "I've always been better on my own," or even, "I'll probably ruin this somehow." On the surface, these comments may sound like casual insecurity or simple pessimism, but when they appear alongside genuine emotional attachment, they can carry a much deeper meaning. When someone who normally protects their inner world voluntarily exposes a weakness without being asked, they are revealing something they usually keep hidden. They may not tell you the entire story. They may not explain where the fear comes from. Instead, they offer you a small glimpse through the side door of self-deprecation. It allows them to be honest, while still maintaining an escape route if the moment suddenly feels too vulnerable. And the most important part is not always what they say. Watch what happens immediately afterward. There may be a brief pause. They may become quieter and observe your reaction carefully. Their emotional system is almost checking what will happen to the information they just handed you. Will you judge them? Try to fix them? Push for a deeper confession? Or will you simply respect what they shared? If you respond with warmth without turning the moment into an interrogation or attempting to rescue them from their own feelings, something important can happen internally. They experience vulnerability without immediate rejection, pressure, or emotional engulfment. They learn that you can see a less polished version of them without using it against them. And when that experience repeats over time, trust can deepen, even if neither person ever labels what is happening. Another meaningful sign is what could be called precision memory. Think back to something you mentioned weeks or even months earlier. At the time, it may have seemed completely ordinary. You might have shared a small detail during a casual conversation and then forgotten about it yourself. But later, this person brings it up unexpectedly, remembering the exact detail or even the context surrounding it. They may mention a preference you once described, a story you told casually, or a tiny fact about your life that you assumed had disappeared into the background. That moment can be easy to dismiss, but it may reveal something important. People do not always remember what they consciously decided to remember. Sometimes the details that stay are the details that carried emotional significance. Someone who struggles with openly expressing attachment may reveal it through attention instead. They may not say, "I think about you all the time." Instead, they remember something you said 3 months ago. They may not openly admit that you occupy space in their thoughts. Instead, they bring up a detail that proves they were listening much more carefully than you realized. Of course, one remembered detail alone cannot prove emotional attachment. Context matters. Patterns matter. Consistency matters. But when these small behaviors appear repeatedly alongside vulnerability, increased trust, and meaningful effort, they can tell a very different story from simple casual interest. Sometimes the quietest evidence is the most revealing, because it appears naturally, without the person realizing they have exposed how much attention they have actually been giving you. In many of their relationships, emotionally distant people become very skilled at staying involved enough to function while remaining detached enough to feel protected. They can communicate, spend time together, and maintain a connection without allowing anyone to reach too deeply into their private emotional world. They usually do not hold on to tiny details from people who never became personally significant to them. So when they remember something you mentioned with surprising accuracy, especially something you had almost forgotten yourself, it can reveal that your inner world has started carrying real importance for them. The conversation may have ended weeks ago, but something you said remained with them long afterward. They may never openly admit that they replayed the conversation or thought about what you meant, but their memory can reveal what their words avoid saying. This does not mean every remembered detail automatically proves deep attachment. Context matters. Patterns matter. But when precise memories appear alongside trust, vulnerability, and consistent attention, they can become meaningful evidence that you occupy a different place in their emotional world than most people do. And there is another sign that can be even more difficult to recognize, because it often looks completely ordinary on the surface. It is what we might call the future reference. This happens when they naturally include you in some imagined future without being asked. Maybe they mention wanting to show you something later. Maybe they talk about taking you somewhere one day. Maybe they describe a future situation and casually place you inside that picture, as though your presence there is already assumed. For someone comfortable with emotional closeness, this kind of thinking may seem completely normal, but for someone who strongly protects their independence, it can carry much more meaning. Their future is usually imagined as something self-contained, something they control without needing another person's presence. Their emotional defenses do not only protect the present, they can also protect the future. So when they begin naturally imagining you somewhere inside that future, something important may already be changing within them. Stay with me, because the next signs reveal an even deeper level of trust. The fourth sign may be one of the most revealing, yet people often fail to recognize its importance. It appears when someone shares information about themselves that they have rarely, if ever, shared with anyone else. It does not have to be a dramatic confession. Sometimes it is surprisingly small, a fear they normally keep hidden, a childhood memory they almost never discuss, a private belief about themselves, a personal experience they have carried quietly for years. It could even be an unusual way they understand the world that they normally keep protected, because revealing it makes them feel exposed. When genuine attachment develops, there may come a moment when they hand you something from the deepest part of their private world. And strangely, they may immediately minimize what they just shared. They might laugh it off, change the subject, or say it is not really important. That reaction can be part of the protection. If you respond negatively, they can convince themselves they never cared about revealing it. But the important thing is not the size of the disclosure, it is what the disclosure represents. For someone who has spent years protecting their inner life, opening one specific part of that wall can require enormous trust. They are not simply sharing information, they are taking a risk with something personal that cannot be completely taken back once another person knows it. If they chose you as the person who could safely receive that information, it can represent a significant level of emotional trust. It may not look like a grand romantic gesture, but sometimes the quietest act of vulnerability carries the greatest meaning. The fifth sign is more painful to understand, so it deserves careful attention. It is the kind of withdrawal that happens when emotional attachment has become stronger than their ability to comfortably manage it. This is different from ordinary distance or their usual need for space. There can be a sense of urgency behind it, as though something inside them has suddenly become overwhelmed. And what makes this withdrawal different is that it can be specifically connected to you. They may say things like, "You make me feel too much," or "I don't know how to handle this with you," or "Being close to you feels too intense." Those statements are not necessarily healthy expressions of love, and they should never be used to excuse hurtful behavior. But they can reveal something important about what is happening internally. Someone who feels nothing significant usually does not need to explain why a particular person affects them so deeply. They can simply maintain distance and move forward. But when a person becomes emotionally important, and that importance triggers fear, the withdrawal can become connected to the very qualities that created the attachment in the first place. It is not simply closeness they are reacting to, it is the intensity of what this particular connection has awakened inside them. That does not mean you should chase them or interpret every withdrawal as proof of hidden love. It means the behavior can sometimes reveal that the connection affected them more deeply than they were prepared to handle. The important question is not only whether they felt something, it is whether they are willing and capable of handling those feelings in a healthy, consistent way. Emotion alone is never enough to build a relationship. There is another sign that works differently from the others because it appears more clearly through behavior than through words. It can be described as unrequested protection. Once someone has genuinely developed a meaningful attachment, their behavior toward you may begin changing in subtle ways. They may become more attentive to situations that could affect you. They may remember things that matter to your comfort or safety without being asked. They might quietly help with something important, check whether you arrived safely, or notice a problem before you mention it. These actions do not have to be dramatic. In fact, they are often so ordinary that they are easy to overlook. But what makes them meaningful is the lack of performance behind them. They are not necessarily trying to impress you or receive praise. They simply notice something and respond. This can reveal that your well-being has begun occupying a place in their internal priorities. However, it is important not to romanticize every protective gesture. Healthy care must exist alongside respect for your independence and boundaries. Genuine attachment is not control, possession, or deciding what is best for you. It is a quiet awareness that your experience matters. When someone who normally focuses heavily on protecting their own emotional space begins naturally considering yours as well, that shift can be significant. And if these behaviors appear consistently alongside vulnerability, remembered details, future references, and genuine effort, the picture becomes much clearer. The bond may have been real, but the deeper question is whether that bond can eventually become a healthy relationship, rather than remaining something they feel deeply but are unable to sustain. They may begin doing small, practical things that quietly protect your well-being. Nothing dramatic, nothing designed to attract attention, just little actions that show they are paying close attention to your life, your needs, and the things that matter to you. That kind of awareness usually requires genuine emotional investment. What makes it especially interesting is how they explain those actions afterward. They might do something thoughtful that clearly required attention and effort, then immediately make it sound completely ordinary. They may say it was nothing, that it took no effort, or that anyone would have done the same thing. That casual attitude can be more revealing than the gesture itself. Someone who feels no meaningful attachment has little reason to minimize an action because there is no deeper significance they are trying to hide. But someone who has developed a real bond and feels uncomfortable with what that bond reveals may want to offer care while keeping the meaning safely disguised. They give you the gesture, then quietly tell you not to examine it too closely. But sometimes you should pay attention, not because every small act proves deep attachment, but because repeated patterns can reveal what words are unwilling to admit. Their explanation may be the defense. Their behavior may reveal what they actually feel in that moment. And this is where we need to slow down, because there is an important danger in hearing all of these signs. I have described several patterns: the indirect admissions, the unusually precise memories, the casual future references, the private disclosures, the intense withdrawal connected specifically to you, and the quiet acts of protection. It can be tempting to treat these signs not simply as information about what happened, but as a reason to keep waiting for a relationship that may not currently be healthy for you. That temptation is completely understandable. When you have spent months or even years wondering whether the connection was ever real, discovering evidence that it mattered can feel incredibly validating. But validation should not become another reason to remain trapped in uncertainty. So let's be very clear about what these signs can and cannot tell you. They can support the possibility that your experience was genuine, that the connection reached a level of emotional significance that this person did not easily allow with everyone, and that you were not necessarily imagining the importance of those moments. The closeness you experienced, the attention they gave you, the personal things they shared, and the small ways they cared may have reflected a genuine emotional bond. Their later distance does not automatically erase everything that happened before it. But there is another truth that matters just as much. A genuine bond does not automatically create a healthy relationship. Those are two completely different things. Someone can care deeply about you and still lack the emotional skills, consistency, or readiness required to build something stable. They can feel strongly and still withdraw. They can miss you and still avoid meaningful communication. They can recognize your importance and still fail to give you what you need. The bond can be real, while their ability to sustain that bond is limited. Your feelings can be real, while the relationship remains unhealthy. And the gap between what someone feels and what they are actually capable of giving you can be real too. All of these truths can exist together. Holding them at the same time is far more honest than turning the situation into a simple story where one person cared and the other did not. Stay with me, because this distinction is what can finally help you separate emotional truth from emotional availability. The most important shift is understanding that knowing someone genuinely bonded with you does not change what you deserve from them. It does not reduce your standards. It does not mean you should keep waiting, keep the door permanently open, or remain endlessly available while they decide how close they are willing to become. What it can change is the story you tell yourself about your own instincts. Maybe you have spent a long time wondering whether you were foolish. Maybe you questioned whether you imagined the connection because their later behavior seemed to contradict everything you experienced before. Maybe you wondered whether your ability to sense emotional depth was simply wishful thinking. But you do not have to turn your own capacity for deep connection into the villain of the story. You may have correctly recognized that something meaningful was developing. The moments that felt important may genuinely have been important. The emotional closeness you sensed may have existed even if the other person later struggled to handle it. That does not mean every interpretation was perfect or that every feeling guaranteed a future together. It means your experience deserves to be taken seriously. You were not necessarily responding to nothing. You may have connected with someone who felt more deeply than they knew how to manage. And that distinction matters because it protects you from the most damaging conclusion of all, the belief that loving deeply was the mistake. It was not. Caring was not the flaw. The mistake would be believing that another person's inability to handle closeness means you should stop trusting your own emotional intelligence. This matters more than you may realize, because the wrong lesson can quietly affect every relationship you build from this point forward. If you leave this experience believing that caring deeply is a weakness, that strong feelings automatically make you vulnerable to being deceived, you may begin protecting yourself so much that you become unavailable to people who are actually capable of meeting you. You may call it wisdom. You may tell yourself that you are simply being careful this time, but sometimes what looks like caution is really fear wearing a more acceptable name. The lesson is not to become less loving. It is not to make your heart smaller or to stop allowing yourself to feel deeply. The lesson is to become more discerning about where you place that depth. Keep your capacity for love, but become more observant about whether the person in front of you has the emotional ability, consistency, and willingness to receive it. That is the real lesson. You do not have to become harder to avoid being hurt. You simply have to become clearer about who has earned access to the deepest parts of you. Stay with me, because this final distinction is the one that can change how you approach every connection that comes after this. The person may have genuinely formed a bond with you. The behavior you experience may have reflected real attachment, even when their words or actions later became confusing. But the important thing to understand is that bonding was never necessarily the missing piece. Capacity was. Someone can develop strong feelings and still lack the ability to maintain emotional consistency. They can care deeply and still struggle to communicate. They can recognize your importance and still be unable to build the kind of relationship you need. And capacity is not something you can hand to another person. You cannot prove someone into emotional readiness. You cannot wait long enough to create it. You cannot love someone so intensely that they suddenly become capable of giving what they were not prepared to give before. Capacity has to be developed by the person who lacks it. It has to be practiced through awareness, accountability, consistency, and a willingness to face uncomfortable emotions instead of constantly escaping them. Whether that development happens is not your responsibility. Your role is not to become the therapist, rescuer, teacher, or emotional training ground for someone who is still learning how to participate in a healthy relationship.